Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
This is why we fight. Democracy is at war. Across the world, we see the forces rallied against it. From the authoritarian regimes of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea to techno-aristocrats, religious fundamentalists, and populist demagogues. In the battlefields of Ukraine to the Straits of Taiwan and the halls of power in the United States, democratic, free values are under determined assault. But there are those who resist. They are activists, journalists, academics, soldiers, religious leaders, and politicians. In this series, we will meet those who claim to be fighting for a free world. We will find out who they are, how they're involved in the struggle, what democracy means to them, and why it's worth fighting for. Welcome to this episode of Why We Fight. On this episode, we are looking further east to Georgia, and I am speaking with Marika Mikiashvili. Please tell me I got that right. And
Hi, yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Marika, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about what it is that you do?
So I'm foreign relations for the political party DROA, which is a relatively small party, but still quite active and well-known, part of Coalition for Change Alliance, which we formed before the fraudulent 2024 October elections. I'm also a full-time, let's say, Twitter media platform on my own, because I think most of my time is consumed by engaging and updating Georgia news and analysis on Twitter. I'm also pretty overscheduled in politics, and I'm also in academia. I lecture. I'm a bachelor's thesis supervisor currently, which is a little too much for me. So yes, bits by bits on many fronts. So yeah.
So unfortunately, the plight of democratic and free values in modern Georgia does not get a lot of Western mainstream media attention. For the audience, could you give us a rundown of what's been happening since and before the 2024 elections?
Yes, so in Georgia, basically the brief summary is that this regime, that is now an illegitimate regime that has usurped power, they do Russia's job. They want to turn Georgia back towards the Russian orbit, and they're doing it, well, rather successfully. And I think they are Russia's and the Kremlin's the most successful Trojan horse operation, because back when they took power in 2012, although I'd say that all pro-Russians voted for them, but not nearly everyone who voted for them were pro-Russian. It wasn't a pro-Russian choice, because in Georgia the support for European integration is consistently at 80-85%. And let's say when I say pro-Russian, I don't even necessarily mean people who actively like Russia, but when we Georgians call regime supporters pro-Russians, we mostly mean that those are the people who find themselves the most comfortable in the lifestyle that Russia offers them, this post-Soviet, corrupt, nepotistic, this very twisted understanding of stability, you know. However, if you tell the regime supporters that they're pro-Russians, they might just punch you, because they'll say that they hate Russia, because historically Russia has exploited Georgia a lot. We're still occupied by Russia, and so on. For the longest time, this now regime, back then it was still a government, the ruling party is called Georgian Dream. It was formed by Georgian but Russian-made billionaire oligarch. He made his money in Russia in 90s. They promised to have good relations with Russia, but also to continue with Western integration. And for the longest time, they've managed successfully to keep this ambiguity. You know, they would be pro-European in narratives, and they would successfully trick a large part of the population and most our foreign partners into believing that they were proceeding with European integration, Georgia's European aspirations. But in practice, they were undermining it, and they were bringing Georgia closer to Russia. This process accelerated after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because it was increasingly hard for them to sit on two chairs, as we say it. And they began drifting towards Russia more and more. Plus, I can imagine that Russia also became more impatient with consolidating its power in what Russia calls its near abroad. So they were pushing harder and harder for certain steps. The most major was what we call Russian law. They first tabled this Russian law in March 2023. And then the street clashes by protesters, we forced them to withdraw it. And then and I'll tell you what the Russian law was about in a minute. And then for entire year, from March 2023 to April 2024, they've been consolidating their repressive apparatus. And when they were ready to strike again, they again tabled this law. And basically ever since then, for more than a year now, since April 2024, we have protests in Georgia. For a few months, it was protest against that law. Then it was rigged elections. And then very quickly after rigged elections, they also announced a freezing of Georgia's European integration bid. Well, it's like technically they call it freezing until 2028, but in essence, we know that it will never be back on the table. So this Russian law was a foreign agents law. For Western ears might not sound that harsh, because I know that the word agent means more things than Georgia. In Georgia, the word agent means outright a spy. So basically they called all NGOs foreign spies, and it's a Soviet legacy. When they call you foreign spy, you're an enemy of the nation, traitor of the nation, and the campaign around it was exactly that. They would attack opposition members, CSOs. They would put graffiti, derogatory graffiti on the homes of active citizens that this foreign paid agent or so spy sells the country out for US dollars. It came to such ridiculous situation that, according to that legislation, an animal shelter that received at least 20% of anonymous donations from abroad, that would be a foreign spy and an enemy to the nation. Thankfully, Georgians understood where this was headed, because yes, we understood that it was fundamentally anti-democratic, fundamentally anti-liberty. But also for us, democracy is not simply democracy. While that is, of course, extremely important too. We know that Georgia cannot survive as a nation in these geographic surroundings that we have between Russia, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, on the eastern part of the Black Sea. If we're not a liberal democracy, if we're not integrated into European Union, NATO, if we don't have democracy and rule of law, then Russia will fill up the space here, because we cannot be a neutral country. It's either the Western integration in our region or it's Russian dependency. And plus, Georgia does not have self-sufficient economic background to build a self-sufficient dictatorship. So any dictatorship in Georgia would need foreign backing, and that would be Russia, China, Iran, as it is happening right now. So there were this spring 2024 protests against this Russian law. Then there were fraudulent elections, and then the end to Georgia's EU bid, and since then we're protesting. In terms of like how it felt, I would say that the spring 2024 was very emotional, a very positively emotional feeling of a national awakening. It really felt like a Georgian spring or something like that. I felt something like what you read from books about 19th century Europe's Spring of Nations and grassroots awakening of national spirit and things like that. It has roots in previous years, of course, but we've basically had constant crisis since 2019. But this felt still different in scales, character, and all of it. So we were very prepared to unseat them in October, and there were these discussions. Will they give up power or will they rig elections? And we knew that just the, let's say, general rigging, normal rigging would not be sufficient for them to win. And by general normal rigging, we mean the pressure and the intimidation and sticks and carrots against the population before the election day. So we thought that the high turnout would overwhelm them, but they've received quite great training, and they were well equipped from the Kremlin to rig elections on the election day proper through the help of electronically assisted voting, for example. And just an example, there are hundreds of thousands of Georgian people abroad who are not registered to vote in their host countries, in large part because the regime propaganda says that since many of them are undocumented, they will arrange with host governments to transfer them to Georgia, to deport them, basically uproot them from living there where they are. So their ID cards of these Georgians who aren't registered anywhere abroad were used by regime enablers and regime thugs here to vote multiple times. So someone who's in Germany, let's say, or the United Kingdom, through his ID card, somebody else voted 30 times for the regime. The electronically assisted voting, the machines did not realize the fraud because the machines are not connected to one another via internet, and each and every single machine has the entire database of voters. So for the machine, it was a normal vote, but then it was 30 of them. This is just an example. This is the schemes that we uncovered later. Of course, I wish we had known and we had calculated this prior. But also, it's not like you can tell the population that, oh, guys, this will be rigged. Because then, when you don't receive sufficient votes and the regime receives a lot of votes, then the blame will be on you that had you not discouraged any hope in population, maybe more people would have come, maybe the turnout would have been sufficient to unseat them, So I would say that in such regimes, in this autocratizing hybrid regimes, which Georgia was until 2024 October, because now, with everything going on, it's a semi-consolidated autocracy already. The opposition is never in a good shape, This regime exploits your human nature shortcomings. You have to be a complete god to calculate through everything, never make a mistake, to deal with such a regime. And anyway, so after November 28, 2024, end to Georgia's EU bid, there have been massive protests and people have been tortured outright in the streets. The protesters, there was everything, the near death, like beating all to near death, rape threats, looting of protesters by the regime police. Of course, we have more than 50 prisoners who are unlawfully imprisoned, and there's not even evidence against them. Like, everyone understands it's a circus, but they're imprisoned anyway. Now we have the latest political leader prisoner, Zurav Girchi-Japaridze, who was arrested 2 days ago over absolutely ridiculous charges that people don't even understand what the hell the charge is. Anyway, so I would like to underline several things about the character of protests in Georgia. Usually people would say that Georgians cannot protest without a leader. Georgians get tired if they don't achieve their objectives within a couple of days. They don't have this, commitment, consistency, endurance. And a whole different stereotype was about we cannot protest in winter. No, it's impossible to protest in wintertime. We need good weather. Well, all of those stereotypes have been broken in this last couple of years. Today is the 178th day, so basically 6 months of daily protests in Georgia. And this is very grassroots, this is very enduring, very consistent, and we've been through one of the coldest winters in this protest. The problems with this protest is that many people, both at home and abroad, have this sense that it doesn't have a political umbrella. We don't fully see the direction or the something resembling a winning formula. But at the same time, today, for example, one regime prisoner, Ucha Bashidze, issued a letter from prison that this is something like a guerrilla movement, guerrilla social movement. Since the regime doesn't see leaders, they don't see the winning formula of the protests. They're also confused in that regard. They don't know what to strike or where to anticipate danger from. And at the same time, whatever they've thrown at us, and there have been some unbelievable stuff. Like, for example, for simply going out protesting, people get a fine of 4 times the national monthly median salary in Georgia. So for simply protesting, there's a fine more than twice the amount of annual tuition fee at state universities, for example. The Chinese surveillance security cameras ensure that everyone is identified and everyone gets these fines, handed out.
Saying that there's are you saying there's use of Chinese facial recognition software?
Yes. Yeah, cameras. It's a lot of them, and that is why now we, the protesters, are out protesting with the various masks and hats, and it looks like a masquerade, the Georgian protests. Mm-hmm. The masks are also banned, by the way, but we don't care about that anymore. The fine for protesting is so high. And then they froze the assets and froze the accounts of funds that were gathering funds for covering people's fines. Yeah, there were questions like, should we pay these fines at all? But people have credits at banks. People get income on these accounts. Anyway, so there's terrible financial, draconian legislation, torture, physical, so all combination of all sorts of dictatorial measures, and Georgia's descent into dictatorship is extremely fast. But since we are a guerrilla, we are also very fluid. And quite persistent. And I have the general understanding that we are going slowly, but towards the right direction. And there's increasing understanding that increasing signs that the regime is in discomfort. Their enablers and pillars are in discomfort. And I believe that this is such a kind of regime that they will pretend that everything is going great until the day that they just collapse. You might just wake up and they're not there anymore.
That is often typical of authoritarian regimes.
I'm
wondering, what drew you into being involved? You do an enormous amount. You're a politician. You're an academic. You're an activist. You wear a lot of hats. And
thank you very much. Yes, well, I've always been let's say, politically aware, because growing up in Georgia and my family has always been committed to Georgia's development, pro-Western course. So I had this general family aura of understanding what was happening since the early years. And then I studied political science also. also in UK. I was at St Andrews, by the way, for my master's. Then I was at an NGO. It was 2021. It was different protests about different elections, and I could understand that. I could see where everything was going, and I couldn't commit to my daily tasks at the NGO because I thought, yeah, I'm doing very valuable things here now, like education of school children in remote mountains of Georgia. But I thought that if we don't have immediate political change, nothing will matter. All these long-term goals will not matter because all these school children will simply pack their bags and leave Georgia anyway. So I went to draw a political party where I knew people, where I trusted people. And that's how I ended up there. I never thought I'd end up at a political party at that age. I think I was 25 by a couple of years ago when I went to draw. And that's it. So yes, I wanted to commit all my daily energy to an immediate political change, which I could see back then that it was an existential thing. This regime was an existential threat to Georgia's independence, and that is how people perceive it in Georgia. Well, unfortunately, not all people, but in an increasing majority. They understand that civic liberties, democracy, and national independence here are very intertwined. So we are defending our national independence from Russia. And that's how I ended up in all this struggle. And my role increased somewhat since I began tweeting about it last April with these Russian law protests. And then I had to then I've been, kind of a reporter. I was in touch with foreign journalists all the time, and that was my thing. And lately, I'm also more involved in domestic internal politics meetings, all of that. And I feel that it is my mission, let's say, because in Georgia's history, you just clearly see that a lot of Georgia's history is about going home back to Europe. So reclaiming what we see is our lost place in Europe, a European family, and this struggle for Europe, for independence, the anti-Russian struggle, democratic struggle. All of this is just, a matter of principle, matter of everything. And it's about endurance first and foremost.
I'm curious about this segment of the Georgian population that is drawn the authoritarian strongman state. Because looking at it from the outside and then comparing a state compare Poland and Russia. One has gone more democratic, and you can see the difference in the way of life and the quality of life. So why, despite that, does this segment of the population still feel attracted to what, to me, objectively is the worst option?
I would say that most Georgians are not people who like Russia per se, and Georgians usually get quite unhappy with seeing inequality. So I wouldn't say that Georgians find it very natural to have a strong man in that sense, because, for example, if somebody consistently shows off power, shows off wealth, it kind of irritates them. If somebody closes a restaurant for his birthday because he's a minister, maybe Georgians will not revolt over that, but it's over time it adds up. People don't really like it. But what this Georgian Dream Party has been capitalizing on quite successfully is this narrative that there will be war in Georgia. Viktor Orban kind of did the same. If the opposition wins, there will be war in Georgia. They want to drag Georgia into war with Russia. We're the only party that brings peace, stability, all of that. And unfortunately, many people bought that. But there's also the part that, so Georgia has had the most turbulent and the most chaotic and maybe full of ruins and collateral damage history of all post-Soviet states, maybe other than Tajikistan in the 90s. So people are extremely risk avoidant, and the United National Movement Party rule in 2000s, which is now vilified as the main menace for the country by the ruling regime. Under UNM, Georgia saw an overnight development, overnight success, very fast development. And then it was 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia. And unfortunately, the Russian propaganda was quite strong, and they were somewhat successful in convincing the rest of the world and even Georgians that had there been a more reasonable government, the war would have been avoided. So that is what they've been capitalizing on, and the Russian propaganda, they were successful in somewhat associating development with danger and war and all of that. But even more than that, since Georgia is a society that has been through constant and very fast transitions and economic loss, depopulation, poverty, wars, for many people, the status quo, the stagnation, this twisted understanding of stability is a comfort zone, not least so because they haven't had personal opportunities, either by nature or by nurture and environment, or everything combined, to succeed in a positively changing environment. So for them, the comfort zone is this post-Soviet swamp. Sorry, I am probably talking in a very complex sentences, but that is their outlook. So for them, this post-Soviet swamp, associated with I don't know, whatever stability means for them, their comfort zone and lack of active warfare, that is what this regime has been capitalizing on. But even that would not have been successful had there been a full clarity that they are not a pro-European force, because at the end of the day, Georgians are very pro-European. And that is why we always encourage our partners to give us full clarity. There must be no handshakes with the regime representatives, which their propaganda then uses as oh, see, we are legitimate, we're still welcome in Europe and the United States. All of this phase is temporary, it's just opposition hysteria. Everything will be good in a couple of years when we get embraced by our Western partners again. And then we will have European integration in a more peaceful and dignified manner, and not how the opposition wants it, through destruction and LGBT rights and all of that. So that is why we ask for complete non-engagement, full clarity from our European partners. And I'll use this opportunity to stress the importance of targeted sanctions and travel bans, including families. I think that has disrupted the regime pillars and enablers quite a lot. That is very important. A third thing I would like to stress is aiding civil society as much as possible, although the current legislation has made it almost impossible. But I'm sure there's always a way when there's a will.
The foreign agents law, whenever I hear those words, my hackles rise. And I think every Democrat's hackles should rise when they hear that. Whenever they seem to be implemented, they seem to bring repression. How much was the implementation of the foreign agents law a fulcrum moment in Georgia's democratic retreat?
The law itself is disastrous, but they haven't really fully implemented it until now. And now they've brought even harsher legislation, as if it was possible at all. And let's see what they do with implementation in the following months. But the overall condition has deteriorated in Georgia so much for democratic forces that I'm not fully sure how much impact that any singular specific law has anymore. Yes, of course it has a big impact for funds, for survival, for basic operation of people. Their aim the aim of the Georgian Dream now, their best hope is for people to just give up and go into mass emigration. That is their best hope. And but I'm not sure. I'm not sure in terms of how harshly they will be implementing it in the following months, or will they opt for some other methods of choking civil society and opposition? Let's see.
Are you seeing any indication that people are beginning to emigrate in droves?
No, I don't entirely see it coming, but the longer the process is protracted, of course, some key people will over time probably have to leave, because it's becoming impossible for them to find any income in Georgia. And Georgia is a very small country. I would say that there are only very, very few people per area of work that make difference. For example, if I don't know, even in this let's say not opposition parties but democratic forces, that's how I call opposition parties, even there, like the people who do routine work of foreign communication, let's say, it's just a few people, So of course, as time goes by, the regime is suffering, but we're also having some losses in capacity, I'd say. So of course, the acceleration of process would be for our benefit. And I've always been in favor of, everything becoming clear overnight, even if it implies a lot of harshness and a lot of risky, or painful decisions and situations. Because for this regime, the optimal scenario would have been to have relative calmness for, another 10 years, and they would slowly establish a dictatorship in Georgia, slowly adopt all the laws anyway, and slowly drive out all the people. So this thing that we still have crisis, and the crisis is ever deepening, although it is it's a very big emotional, psychological, and material toll on all of us, it is the chance that we have at liberation. Because had the crisis not been here, had the protests not been here, it would be a slow boiling of the frog, like they have been doing for 12 years already.
In your work, you put your head above the parapet, as many activist politicians do. Have you faced any personal threats and pressures? And if so, how do you handle the risks that come with speaking out against a regime like this?
That is, of course, a very terrifying thought, and many of my friends have been through a lot, including physical confrontation against them, against their family members. I myself have not really faced that much trouble yet, and I suppose that is probably partly because I'm not that active in the streets. I think they come after either leaders or people who are active in the streets more, at least as of now. Yes, of course I attend protests, but when I attend rallies, I'm usually not in the front lines, not least so because there is no internet coverage and I tweet live from the protests. Yes.
Now, how can smaller democracies resist the influence of large authoritarian neighbors like Russia? Because it is without a doubt to me that the threat that many small democracies, especially in Europe, face is, of course, Russia. But we see this in other areas of the world as well. We see this with China and Taiwan.
I don't think I can fully comment on how to defend ourselves in military terms. And I'm referring to China and Taiwan in this particular response. But as for protecting society from hybrid undermining and like a takeover, as happened in Georgia, I would say that never assume that you're safe. I think what doomed Georgia, hopefully we are not fully doomed, but this is not the situation we would like to find ourselves in, right? What doomed Georgia is the illusion of security. We had assumed both the people and the political class as well, that, oh, it's impossible for any government in Georgia to bring Georgia back into the Russian orbit. It's impossible because the people will not accept it. We are strongly, overwhelmingly pro-European integration, anti-Kremlin, and so on. Well, bit by bit, while everyone was, in oblivion through this illusion of security, they've undermined the entire country, captured the entire country. And now people are like, oh, wait, now that they're looking back on the big picture, which they did not want to look at while it was forming. They were more comfortable in seeing things as an isolated instances rather than a big picture forming. So I would say that if Russia can take Georgia, the most anti-Kremlin former colony of Russia, then any autocracy can take anything within a span of a decade, let alone a generation. So always be alert. Don't disregard anything, whatever tiniest step is going to the wrong direction. And don't assume that you're safe just because you're an EU member or a democracy or functioning democracy or whatever. That would be my advice. Be alert.
This is a question I ask to all of my interviewees. But what is the value of freedom and democracy in your eyes?
In Georgia's case, as I said, it's also a national identity, national independence thing. And I don't think that the fervor, the drive of this protest would have been as big, as strong, if people hadn't associated democracy with a national protection, national identity. And I think this is exactly what makes protests in Georgia different than protests in Russia or even Belarus, that it wasn't really a national identity thing there. For us, it is. And this is what gives us fuel, I would say, to not give up. But also on a more personal level, of course, it's an opportunity. It's a thing that you'll never have to compromise with your conscience, first and foremost, in a democracy and in a liberty. While in autocratic rule, you can pretend all you want that it won't touch upon you, but you will end up in a situation where you will have to compromise with your conscience. And either you'll have to become what we call a slave, so subservient to others and the corrupt order that reigns around you, or you would have to be someone who crushes others, or you have to fight it. So there's only three options, and this is, by the way, what Zurav Girchi-Japaridze said in one of his interviews before his arrest. No, I think it was long before, but still, that his children only have three options: either become subservient, or become a bully, or fight it. That's it.
You may have just answered that question, but I'm wondering what advice you have to people in nations that look to be going down this terrible path, but who aren't quite as far, unfortunately, as Georgia has unfortunately gone. Nations like Hungary or the United States.
So first of all, as I said before, be alert and never assume that you're safe. But also be positively uncompromising and always stay true to your ideals. In Georgia, oftentimes, for the sake of some grand unity, we have tolerated people whose loyalties are dubious, let's say. Or some politicians have made some steps that somewhat shook hands with the regime, and in the big picture, it always still turned out that the Roman Cato-like uncompromising position was always the right one, also practically. in the hindsight. Now, I'm not saying that every nation has the same situation. Maybe different things will apply to others, but this is my experience and Georgia's experience.
What gives you hope that democracy can survive and thrive in the face of these growing authoritarian trends globally?
I think we do have some positive waves, especially in European countries lately. Just recently, Nicu Jordan won in Romania. Well, it's hard to say, but endurance, it depends on us. The more endurance we have, the more our cause will win. I think I'm a bit more qualified to comment on Georgia. In Georgia, what gives me hope is the persistence and continuity, and knowing that through the national identity thing, the fuel to this resistance is really big. And they have not really, they're not a consolidated dictatorship yet. And when they have to consolidate while facing a deep crisis, they shrink, they make mistakes, they upset many of their pillars. And to further hinder their consolidation, that is why we need sanctions.
Just about the demographic of this movement, what role are young people playing? Because unfortunately in the West and in the established democracies, we see a growing trend of young people feeling increasingly disenfranchised with the idea of democracy.
This used to be a thing in Georgia too. The young people were disengaged. However, when the situation, when we understood that it's again about national identity, not just about politics and about, I don't know, not just about wages or which politicians you like or something, they became more active. Interestingly, the Gen Z, as we call them, right, they are quite active when the situation gets to a boiling point. So during crackdowns, they're extremely active. But it seems like the endurance and consistency has been more a feature of millennials and the older generations in these protests, because those who go to the protest every single day or near daily, they are young. They're definitely young, but they're not teenagers usually. Teenagers are active at the clashing front lines when it does happen, and then the slightly older people in their mid-20s and older, they seem to be more active in the endurance part and the silent consistency that builds up the new momentum. But the good news is that everyone is involved. Everyone is involved and everyone plays a role in here.
I'm wondering, again, growing narratives we're seeing in the West is that when Russia does something like the invasion of Georgia or the invasion of Ukraine, it is in some way the West's fault, because we were expanding NATO, we were expanding the EU, and I'm wondering what you have to say to the people that espouse those views.
There are several factors to it. First is those people who lash out at the West for the sake of lashing out at the West, and they think they're being anti-colonial. They take zero consideration of agency of local peoples. So Georgians have no agency, they have no desires. Ukrainians have no agency and desires. Whatever Americans tell them, this is what they do, right? This should be, in theory at least, absolutely counter to what they preach, but they still preach it. And so the peoples, they have sufficient experience of Russia, and we Georgians in the 90s, we did our absolute best test to appease to Russia, to be good neighbors with Russia, but they did not want it. And that is what pushed our drive to NATO and European Union. That is one thing. Another thing is that for Russia, it is impermissible to have a successful countries, in its former colonies, in the countries which Russian people are more or less familiar with, and then they can draw parallels and they can say like, oh wait, why can Georgians live well? Why can Ukrainians live well? And then why can't we? It's impermissible for them. And actually, it's my theory, my hypothesis. I call it the Great Wall of the Caspian Sea. That since Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, we are all, at least in theory, part of European enlargement. And for that very reason, there will never be a sufficiently Russian loyal government in here, in Russia's eyes. Because what if tomorrow this government changes? Russia needs to undermine these states in any case so that they never, in theory, succeed at democratization and European enlargement, because Russia is paranoid. No amount of assurance will help. While where there are revolutions in Kyrgyzstan, for example, Russia does not care much because it's in Central Asia, it's surrounded by autocracies, and Russia doesn't expect Europeanization there. But the Europeanization, it's a chicken or egg first, but in this case we know for sure which one was first. The Russian malign intent was first. If Russia had been kinder to its neighbors, there would have been. If Russia had been kinder to its neighbors, there would have been no need among its neighbors to be in NATO to begin with.
What do you have to say to those in established democracies who are losing faith with democracy? And what do you have to say about how it feels to watch it slip away?
I think it's they don't know what they have. Other people in other countries are dying for the ideas and for the living that they have, and I don't mean just material living, the liberties that they have. It's so the whataboutism. If something ends Western civilization, it's probably whataboutism. I've been joking about it, but still, like whenever I speak about corruption in Russia or something like that, there's always some guy who speaks up and says like, oh, what about corruption in Germany? I don't know, go live in Russia for a year or 5 years and then compare it, okay? Then you won't be at all comparing corruption in Russia and Germany. So this whataboutism is definitely a killer, and it is a great tool of Russian propaganda. I would say appreciate what you have until you have it, definitely. But I honestly don't know how to make people appreciate that until they see it slipping it away, because they just have to see it with their eyes, what it feels like to not have democracy. So, I don't know, probably before dooming your country, go visit for a few months a country where there's no democracy.
And how does it feel to watch democracy slip away and to feel it slip away in your home?
It's honestly the most terrifying thing. Also because in Georgia, autocracy and dictatorship means handing the country over to Russia. And although I have Belarusian friends, of course I knew all the Belarusian cause, you still do not comprehend it until it happens to you, until you face the prospect of loss of your home, the prospect that someday you'll be either in jail or in exile and unable to come back home. I've traveled a lot, I've lived abroad, and the sense that somewhere, you can always come back home if something's wrong, if you need support, and home is like a shoulder to cry on, let's say. And when you see that it's absolutely slipping away, and then you won't have anything that you call home. Yes, of course, you can settle elsewhere, but it's still different. So nothing is quite like the pain of knowing that you'll be losing your home. And unfortunately, I don't think that it can be conveyed or explained to others until they see see it for themselves, because I myself also, as much as I sympathized with Belarusians, of course, did not emotionally feel what it was like.
To any of my listeners in the established democracies, although looking at the metrics, I have a few listeners from non-established places, how can they assist Georgia in its struggle for democracy from abroad?
Thank you for that question. I would say non-engagement with the regime from your governments and representatives. If you can ensure that, if you can push for that. I mean, to a degree it is sustained, but still it needs further entrenchment and continuation. Sanctions do work in Georgia, and I often get asked, like, well, sanctions didn't work in Belarus and Iran. That is because the sanctions were too late there. It can help while the dictatorship is still consolidating. It can help upset their pillars and disrupt their lines of support and economic channels and so on. And we are winning a lot of time by protesting and keeping the crisis and deepening the crisis that the regime artificially created by not agreeing on fair elections while they're consolidating. So this is an opportunity for us. It's too late after they already consolidate. And they have rechanneled everything, reoriented all the economy towards autocratic countries like Russia, China, and so on. In which case they won't need any help and backing from, even nominal, from the US and Europe. They'll be an outright hostile. Georgia would be in that case outright hostile to the entire West, and a smuggling place, a platform or whatever for all sorts of tyrannical influences. Iran, China, Russia, and so on. Then there's aiding civil society as much as possible. And fourth, which is the easiest for regular citizen, average people to do, is keep Georgia alive as a topic, pitch it to media, post about it, share it, amplify our voices. And thank you very much, actually, the people on Twitter who've been with us for all this more than a year. They are a lot of consolation and inspiration for all of us.
And do you recommend any English language news services or influencers, including yourself, and people and activists on Twitter, for people to follow to get an accurate idea of what's happening in Georgia?
I would say follow Publica with a K on Twitter. It's a news agency. Follow Civil G, so civil.g. Civil G is also a news website, and they have really good English materials. Radio Liberty Georgia as a website, it's really great. I hope they don't have problems with operation. On Twitter, I would say, thanks myself. There's also Keti Shoshiashvili, Anna Guarishvili, and several people. Terje Helland is also very active from Norway. Hans Gutbrod, but he's more on Blue Sky. He's a good analyst. Oh boy, I think I'm just forgetting a lot of great people and feeling stressed because of it. So, yeah. And for more activist side, there's Jesko Fela. Jesko Fela is how he's written. General George Fela. There's also Gocha Goksadze, a more activistic side. Yeah.
And my final question, it's usually quite a short one. Do you have any message for the autocrats and the dictators and the oligarchs of the world?
Okay, I think my particular answer now will probably be a little, maybe even out of this world. But the other day I had a look at a regime representative woman, her photograph, very recent, and I remember her from a couple of years ago. And although I'm much more stressed in daily life, most probably, than she has enormous income and all the riches of the world and all of that. She aged like couple decades, over 2 years, and I'm like, oh wow, like obviously, evidently, something that keeps your beauty is sleeping with a clean conscience more than any riches of the world. So I don't know. I like everything is so fragile for these autocrats. No one would think Assad would fall, and yet suddenly they do overnight. It seems impossible until it's done, and they seem invincible until they are defeated. And I don't know how they sleep at night, or why do they even want to live the lives of not sleeping with clean conscience at night. Eventually, all dictatorships fall, of course, and the end will be very bitter for all of them.
I have no more questions. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think it's you were very comprehensive. Thank you very much. I think we've covered everything. Just like endure and keep going. Oh yeah, so I think it was Václav Havel who said that even if you don't see the way out, the important thing is that you just keep going, and at some point there will be opportunity.
Marika, thank you very much. Thank you so much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, you did hear it here first. Dictatorship is bad for your skin. This has been Why We Fight. If you enjoyed the program, please consider subscribing to this show or financially supporting my work by following the Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee links below. For my written work and commentary, then check out my Substack, Dictators v Democrats. If you want to join a community of those who believe that democracy is worth fighting for, then feel free to join the Dictators v Democrats Discord server, which is also linked below. And remember, democracy is non-negotiable.